Good afternoon and welcome to the Education Hub live webinars. These are webinars which we hold every second Wednesday, and what we do is we invite guest speakers onto our webinars. We talk about health, fitness and sport. Today we're talking rugby and specifically the tackle. I'm going to be interviewing Dr. Sharif Hendricks. Welcome, Sharif.
Thanks for having me. Thanks, Justin.
And before we get started, I want you to be aware that you are able to ask questions. So that's why I've got my computer here. And if you go on to our Facebook site, CISA.com, and you will see that we have, you can comment there and ask questions. And as we go, I will ask Sharif those questions. Now, Sharif, I know that you are a senior researcher here at the Sports Science Institute with UCT.
Yeah.
And you are also a visiting fellow at Leeds Beckett.
Yes, that's good.
Yeah. We've known each other for a number of years.
Yeah.
And we both have something in common, that we both love rugby and been involved in rugby.
Yeah.
But I know one of your passions has been researching contact, and specifically the tackle.
Yeah.
Where did that all start for you, Sharif?
Well, it started in 2008, 10 years ago. Let's think about it. So 10 years ago, I started my master's here at UCT. And at that time, the tackle started to emerge as an area of interest in the rugby research fields. And yeah, I started my master's, went on to do my PhD, and then kept on going in that research area. Yeah, the rest is history.
Okay. And what were the main areas you looked at in your master's and your PhD concerning the tackle?
Yeah, so in my master's, at the master's level, we just wanted to know. So the overarching question, or the bottom line question was, how do we improve tackle performance and reduce the risk of injury? Okay, so that was the main question. So we wanted to do this, but we didn't know what coaches or players are doing at training. So my master's was basically trying to answer that question. What are players doing during training for the tackle?
And what was the outcome? So is that how they are training and being coached for the tackle?
So it was basically a questionnaire that we handed to players. It was at the I forgot the tournament that it was now, but it was basically the top playing schools in the Western Cape. And we just asked players a bit about their attitudes and their behaviors around injury prevention, around performance, and about specific techniques and behaviors. Yeah, so it was a questionnaire. And overall, at that time, the players seemed like they had good knowledge about what's a good tackle and what's a bad tackle, and a good attitude towards injury prevention and performance. Although performance was a bit higher, it wasn't significantly higher than injury prevention.
Okay, and then from there in your PhD?
Then the PhD, so now we kind of had an idea of what players were doing during training. Then we wanted to develop something that reduced the risk of injury and improved the performance, some form of product. But then we realized we didn't know what's going on enough, or we don't know enough about what goes on around the tackle in matches. And then my PhD was basically a couple of video analysis studies. So the one was looking at the physical components of the tackle, so looking at velocity, momentum, and acceleration in the tackle for both the ball carrier and tackler, and also looking at what techniques relate to performance and injury. So that was my PhD in a nutshell. And then we started off building what we now call a contact simulator, but that was handed over to another student who then finished his PhD on the contact simulator, or developing the contact simulator further, now housed on the blue floor at the Sports Science Institute.
Okay. So when you talk about performance and injury.
Yeah.
So what are you talking about when you say, so you've researched the tackle, and we're going to get into the questions now.
Yeah.
So what is the difference when we're talking about performance in the tackle? What are we talking about?
So in those questionnaires and throughout the research, what we define as performance is wanting to basically achieve the the performance goal of the tackle, which is to kind of dominate the contact and basically gain territory,
Yes.
whether you're the ball carrier or the tackler. From a safety point of view, also the injury prevention point of view, is to kind of come away from that tackle or from that contact point injury-free. And so at the time what we found was there was a bit of a distinction between, you kind of have to, you either choose performance or injury prevention as a, it's like either or. But what we now know is that to perform better also reduces the risk of injury.
Okay. So when we when we have got good tackle technique, it's effective and it reduces our risk of injury.
And safe, correct.
And it's safe.
Yeah.
So that's good news, because often people think they have to do an illegal type of tackle to be successful.
Exactly.
And we're going to get to what is a good tackle. We're going to get there.
Yeah, yeah.
What people who are watching this might not know, but in South Africa, there is no junior rugby manual on what age you should start to tackle and how you should learn that. There's no official manual at the moment.
Yeah.
So Sharif and I actually did a project a few years ago where we did some research in the different provinces, and we found that some provinces start full contact at 5 years old. Some are playing tag from 5 years to 9 years old and only starting full contact at 9 years old. In addition to that, we've had England that have also only start contact now at 9, New Zealand as well. So, but in South Africa, we don't have. So, Sharif, the question that I've got for you is, at what age can a child learn how to properly execute the tackle?
Okay, so maybe before we even talk about the tackle,
Yes.
let's go one step and backwards, and we have tackle skill and then contact technique. So you need contact technique to perform well in the tackle. So that's number one. So when you want to introduce the tackle, you need to make sure players have good contact technique. So a lot of evidence suggests, or it's pointing towards starting full contact tackle rugby at under 9, and playing variations of tag or touch rugby at the under 6, under 7, under 8 age categories. But there's no evidence for this, but what we probably suggest is that you want to get kids kind of contact ready during those ages of 6, 7, 8. And that could mean, do you know what I mean? In fact, what the listeners could probably relate to is kids at that age play with each other and they're wrestling and grappling and moving around. So there are forms of contact that they're already doing.
Yes.
You don't even have to structure that contact. Just making sure that kids at that age know how to make contact, number one, how to fall, how to manage their body within contact. So that when they get to the under 9 level, it's not just this new thing.
Yes.
The tackle just isn't this new thing to them. So they are prepared for the under 9 category.
So obviously we were discussing this before we went on air,
Yeah.
and one of the things I'm interested in is if you look at how children learn a skill.
Yeah.
So for example, 50% of 6-year-olds can't throw and catch a ball with one hand.
Yeah.
Now that's very well, it's very well accepted,
Yeah.
that kids learn complex skills
Yeah.
only when their brain is ready to learn a complex physical skill.
Yeah.
And tackling and contact
Yeah.
skills,
Yeah.
those are not simple skills,
Yeah.
they are complex skills.
Yeah.
So for me, although we can't say, well, here's a research paper that says you can only teach a tackle at 9, if we look at the other research, it's pointing towards that if I'm getting little kids to run at each other at full pace, can I expect them to be able to know how to tackle?
At which age category?
I'm saying at 6.
At 6. No, so you wouldn't ask the two kids to run straight at each other at that age. Do you know what I mean? So
That's what happens in South Africa.
Yeah, so I wouldn't advise that. The point of contact there again would be kind of like you're saying. So let's break it down further. So maybe what you're referring to is fundamental movement skills
and sports skills.
So that's just jumping, throwing, catching.
Yeah.
And then you have fundamental game skills, and we can actually and this idea just came now, is that we can actually probably categorize contact under fundamental game skills.
For sure.
And this is not two people or two kids running towards each other and then you tackle it. Do you know what I mean? This is a small area, basically wrestling and grappling in a small area, so that you can get that contact management right. So
you're saying, what you're saying is, obviously at 6 they don't have potentially all of the cognitive ability to learn a complex skill, but you're introducing them to that skill in a controlled environment.
In a controlled environment.
And I don't think many people would argue with that.
Yeah.
I'm just making that point in relation to our current situation.
Yeah.
Then now we get on to, so we've got, and we say, right, this kid from a cognitive point of view can learn a complex skill.
Yeah.
Now the question is, how do we teach the tackle?
Okay, so now we're getting in a bit to where there's some evidence for it.
Yes.
Okay, so now we're getting into teaching the tackle. So let me actually start where the sport skill literature is. So the sport skill literature, and a lot of it's based on non-contact sports, kind of says you don't have to. So in the past, they were kind of like have this stepwise approach to introducing skill that you don't have. So you do block training first, and so when I say block training, like structured training, and then you move towards unstructured training. So you kind of first
you've got a controlled environment.
Learn the skill in controlled conditions,
yes.
And then you move.
And you're cutting that skill into small parts.
And then you move to So this is true for sport skill and skill in general. You don't have to do that.
Yes.
You can go. You can have the basic movement idea or the movement pattern, and then go straight into the kind of overall play, and you will learn on the go. That's how the body would adapt. For the tackle, though, we still think that because it's the physicality and the risk of injuries there, we still feel you need to use a
staged approach.
Yeah, a stepwise approach. Yeah. And here the coach is keen, kind of making sure the player develops through or goes through the process correctly. So the starting point is to understand the level of the player. So what you're working with. So in this case, the under 9 player who probably doesn't have much contact experience, but we must remember this player, the under 9 player, probably has an idea of what contact or the tackle should look like because they're obviously watching rugby on the weekend. So there's some dipping motion. Sometimes they're shooting towards the player, so they have an idea of what contact should be, and so. That idea might not be the best, or the impression that they have might not be the best idea of the tackle, and that's probably where the coach or the physical educator can step in. And so we've come up with this 10 or 11 criteria for the ball carrier and tackler that coaches can go through and use to assess players' tackle ability.
Okay.
And so you can see, and so this is their tackle technique. And so when I talk about technique, it's basically their movement through the skill. When I talk about skill, it's how they do that movement under the conditions. There's a small difference. Okay, so now as a coach, you can basically assess whether that player is performing these actions or not. If they're not performing these actions, then maybe you need some time to work in a structured setting on these specific techniques and emphasize it. And some of these techniques include, for example, head position where you head up, leg driving through contact, and the main point here is also that they need to do it in a condition that's as close as possible to the match situation.
Yes.
So here I'd advise you can work with a shield maybe as a start, but the aim should be to work with player. Do you know what I mean? Again, so that player can get comfortable with another player. Tackle bags, no, because what we've learned over time was that tackle bags actually introduce bad techniques from a tackling.
Okay. So that's very interesting.
Yeah.
So what you're saying is from the research that you've done,
Yeah.
you guys have got a tackle simulator that's a few meters away here.
Yeah.
From the research you guys have done, you're not saying a tackle bag should be used extensively to practice the tackle.
To practice a tackle.
Why? Why
and it's because, again, I think it's something to do with players' impressions of how they should tackle. So this tackle bag is stationary, it's standing still, and what happens is players dive towards the bag because it's stationary. They can do that,
yes.
and then that gets considered as tackle training. So
Okay.
on a coach's
They've done
diary,
tackling.
I've done tackling today,
Yes.
but that's not. You kind of need to focus on the player's technique, work on the technique, and try to get bodies together. And if you can, slowly moving towards each other. Then, so that kind of gives the more representative of match demand situation.
Yeah. Okay. So now we've got a general idea of when they can start learning the tackle. You've got a whole lot of points which, from your research. And I know in your latest paper you actually have a framework which you can give to coaches where they can then know what to do when. But what about, where does a coach go to learn? So let's say I want to teach guys the drills that I'm going to use. Where does a coach go to get those currently?
So that's a good question. We don't know exactly where coaches are going, so they obviously probably go to Google,
Yes.
And they used Google. We did a study recently where we asked a small sample of coaches basically where they get the information from, and a lot of it's from websites, from peers, so they'll speak to another coach, especially coaches maybe at a higher level, and then ask, what are you doing? So this is where coaches are getting their information from. So that's what we know. At the moment, in South Africa, the main resource is BoxSmart. So you should be going to BoxSmart for your information.
So if you go to the SA Rugby website or you just type in BoxSmart, there's a number of documents there on how to condition for rugby and how to tackle. Can I add on?
So the main, and so when you're also looking at websites, so when you're Googling something, make sure you know what the basis of that drill was, or the purpose, the person who drew it up for, and the level that person, because again, there's a lot of rugby coaching websites, and that drill or that activity might not apply to your setting or your context, and so you need to know like the framework that person used, or the basis of that drill that person used in coming up with that drill.
Okay. So now, Sharif, I'm a coach. I'm teaching at my local primary school. And I'm getting ready to teach my kids how to tackle. And now I'm telling them, okay, your head is up. Okay. And I'm telling them where to aim the tackle. Now, when I was at school, they said the rule was, without legs you can't run. So they told us to always try and tackle low if we could. Okay. What is the research saying now about where we should tackle? So
the evidence shows, or what we try to get out now, is that you need to aim for the midsection, the hip area of the ball carrier.
So the soft section here.
So say from your nipple to your hip. So that's the area we want to encourage players to target. And the reason for avoiding the legs, because we found that ball carriers or tacklers are at higher risk of injury by aiming for the legs, because they expose themselves to the moving parts of the ball carrier. So they're at risk of head injuries and shoulder injuries if they do that.
So as a teacher or as a coach now, this is my area between the hip and the nipple line. That's where I should be saying you aim. Obviously, we know in rugby, I could be doing a side tackle or 100%. Tackling a guy from the back. I've got to ankle tap him or do something. So it's not saying you can never tackle the legs, but from an injury prevention side, this is where you should be aiming.
So good point. So the techniques that we encourage, or the techniques that we use to measure tackle technique, are for the front on, straightforward tackle. And so that's your schema. So once a player knows that they're in good stead to go on, then maybe to more advanced tackling skills. So then we can start training the side-on tackle, the wrap tackle, the tap tackle. Then we can move on, because those are all forms of tackling. So
we've got some questions here online, but just before I get to them, Sharif, obviously, we know there's been a lot of talk about the high tackle.
Yeah.
And we know that the most injuries in rugby happen in the tackle.
Yeah.
And one of the...
More than 50%.
More than 50%.
Yeah.
And we know that the most serious injury in the tackle is an acute spinal cord injury,
Yeah.
or a traumatic brain injury.
Yeah.
Those are the most serious injuries. And those are often associated with a high tackle.
Yeah.
So there's been a lot of emphasis on ruling out the high tackle.
Yeah.
And obviously, if we're teaching kids to tackle here between the hip and the nipple line, that's good tackle technique. It's effective and it's safer for the tackler.
Yeah. For the tackler and the ball carrier.
Yes, and the ball carrier.
Yeah.
Now my question is this: in the UK,
Yeah.
I think it's the 4th year or the 5th year, although they've got much stricter, and I know that's only data from the UK. I don't think the South African data is the same. But in the UK, they're showing that the levels of concussion, the injury levels of concussion are going up.
Yeah.
Why do you think that is?
So the one explanation that we have for the increase in concussion is maybe the increase in concussion awareness.
Yeah.
So people are more aware of concussion, players are reporting concussion more, and also we are, like you said, more strict on concussion. So the tagline or the phrase is, when in doubt, sit them out.
Yes.
So if there's any doubt, you take the player off. And so that might be a reason for the increase in numbers of concussion that you see in presentations.
Yeah. You and I were, just before we started, we were looking at a study that's only come out this year.
Yeah.
By Gregory Tierney,
Yeah.
from Trinity College in Ireland.
Yeah.
And they've done a study on the higher you get tackled, the more risk you have of a concussion.
Yeah.
And what do you think that says to us about our current tackle technique?
Okay, so that study you are referring to is an exploratory study. So
Yes.
it's still trying to find out, and it is a lab-based study. So it was still trying to find out. So
Yes.
the aim of that study was basically to see if you get, the higher you go, is there an effect basically on head velocity and acceleration.
Yes.
And they found some findings related to that. So what's the question again?
So I'm saying, does that kind of backs up what we're saying?
Yes.
The higher the tackle, the more dangerous for the brain.
No, 100%. Look, there is no, and World Rugby is aware of this.
Yes.
And the rugby community should be aware. In fact, we can go as far, if you're contacting the head, it shouldn't be considered a tackle. Do you know what I mean? It's
Yes.
not under the definition of a tackle.
Yes.
So there are rules that govern against that. And I know there's a lot of push even to lower the line of a high tackle.
Yes.
So at the moment it's at the shoulder, and they want to move it further down to the nipple,
Yes.
just so that they can further reduce injuries to the head and the risk of injury to the head. But that might be difficult. Again, as we spoke earlier, not all tackles are full-on one-on-one tackles, and there is variability on how players contact each other based on where you act on the field.
So what I find interesting about this study is Gregory is quite. They refer to the rising evidence about subconcussive hits.
Yeah.
And that there's starting to be some evidence to show that it's not only, and this is why the tackle is so important and that it's probably regulated, is that not only is there a chance of brain injury through a concussion, but there's some evidence coming out now that subconcussive hits have an effect on the brain.
Yeah. So the term subconcussion is not conclusive yet. There's no full definition for that, and the literature for subconcussive impacts, it's also not strong enough to even argue that point yet.
Yeah.
So there's still work on that. Subconcussive impacts, it's something that came about in American football, and it's kind of like filtering into other contact sport. But a recent review, a systematic review, like the take-home message was, further research is needed, and the term subconcussive hasn't been clearly defined yet.
Yeah.
And
So-
because there's no way in telling yet what is subconcussive. Like, for argument's sake, I can knock my head, is that subconcussive
Yeah.
or not? So there's
Yeah.
that debate still going.
Yeah, I think we had Angus Hunter here from Stirling University,
Yeah.
and they've done the research on headering in soccer,
Yeah.
and they've shown that there's long-term cognitive deficits
Yeah.
for people who've played soccer
Yeah.
because of all the headering, but there's also some short-term.
Yeah.
So obviously in that study they did, they got soccer players to header the ball and then measured their cognitive function immediately post,
Yeah.
and that cognitive function was negatively affected.
Okay.
So, the point that I'm making is that this is why contact and how we see the tackle and what age boys play rugby is so important, because there seems to be, and I know that in America now there's no headering the ball in junior football
Yeah.
because of that evidence that's
Yeah.
come out. So all I'm saying is that the importance now of safety in the tackle,
Yeah.
because of this, not conclusive evidence,
Yeah.
but because of the start of concussive hits,
Yeah.
the problem with concussive hits.
Oh no, yeah.
Yeah.
So there's the risk of concussion in a tackle.
Yes.
And so the main point is that nowhere in the literature or in coaching manuals as well do we say make contact with the head.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? So and I think we can all agree with that players should be avoiding contact with the head. They should be placing their head on the correct side.
Yeah.
And they should be driving through the contact. But what we're finding is sometimes players are putting their heads on the incorrect, and that increases their risk of injury. And so we want to know why players are doing this. Maybe a question like that: why players are doing that? And sometimes it's performance related.
Yes.
So sometimes players would put themselves at risk to make the tackle.
They're desperate to save the try.
To save the try. On the same token, players maybe don't have the right skill set to make the tackle. So they're not sure what to do, and then they just kind of put their body on the line. Yeah.
But another point that you raised in your research is the issue around conditioning.
Yeah.
So I know in the one paper that you were involved in, you guys showed more tackle injuries in the second half of the game, or the fourth quarter.
Yeah, 100%.
So tell me a little bit about why is conditioning so important?
So obviously the tackle and contact is not just a technical skill; it's quite a physical skill as well.
Yes.
So we always argue that it's both a physical and technical skill. Also, and I've been made aware of this, there's a tactical part to it. So you have the tackle, and you make tackles in a defensive system or in a defensive line. So there's a tactical part to it. And the last time I gave a podcast, someone also reminded me there's also a psychological component. You need to kind of want to tackle. There needs to be a motivation to tackle. So there's those four components to the tackle. Our work's focused a lot on the technical part, but we're starting to work more also in the physical domain. Recently we did an honors student project where we kind of physically fatigued players and then got them to tackle on the contact simulator, and we showed that as they got more fatigued, their tackle technique slowly decreased. And it was based on our video analysis findings that players' tackle technique decreased
With fatigue. Yeah.
And so now we have more conclusive evidence to show that there's a physical fatigue or physical component to tackle technique, and there's a relationship there.
So if I get a player and I don't have a proper pre-season,
100%.
and I throw them into a match,
100%.
higher risk of injury.
Higher risk of injury.
Or if I'm on a tour and players are playing too many matches. So for example, I heard a scenario of where some primary school players are playing 3 matches in a week.
Yeah.
So you're creating fatigue. So you're actually putting that player at higher risk.
And then also in the pre-season, when you're training, when you're not tackling or you're not prepping under fatigued conditions. So you're training a tackle and you do it when everyone's well rested, or you're doing it at the beginning of the session and everyone's has good technique.
Yeah.
You need to train tackling under fatigue conditions as well.
Yeah. So I think we've covered a lot of ground.
Yeah.
The Sports Science Institute hosts a school sports summit every year, and we've got one coming up in September. If you've enjoyed what Sharif has said, please come to our school sports summit. We'll put the details, the link when we put up the live webinar. Sharif, what are you going to be talking about in September?
I'll be talking about skill acquisition and how to develop skill and using some skill frameworks to develop skill.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sharif, I know you also run a website.
Yeah.
What website is that?
So you can go to rugbyscientists.com and then you can find more information on the science we do. Yeah.
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 Sharif, it's amazing amount of work you guys have done on the tackle.
Yeah.
So it's great to have South African expertise. And I know you've got a whole lot of other projects planned, which we haven't even had time to get to. But thanks for making the time to be with us.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.